Hello students, and welcome to the conclusion of the lesson on inverse functions and their derivatives. And let's take a look at example 3 here, where we're asked to find for the first time the derivative of the inverse at 9. Okay, so some dead ends here that is going to be quite difficult for you. So let me just put out some dead ends, right, so that you can see why this is very difficult. It would be to set y equal to 3x cubed minus x plus 7 and then solve for x. Okay, and this is theoretically possible to do, but this is difficult and messy. Okay, so in other words, we can find the inverse. This is to find the inverse algebraically. Okay. So you could do this, but you will find that it gets very difficult. Okay. So what we want to do instead is look at the fact that all we're dealing with here is the inverse at a particular value. In other words, we have a function. This is f of x equals 3x cubed minus x plus 7. We're going to feed something into it, and then we're going to get out 9. Okay, and that is the exact same thing as saying, f inverse of 9 would be like we're feeding in 9 into here, and we're going to get out some other value x. Okay, so we don't need to find the general function for the inverse function. What we only need to deal with is the inverse at a specific value, 9. So, best way to handle this, so I'm going to set 9 equal to f of x and solve for x. Okay. And then solve for x. Okay, and this still isn't exactly trivial, but it's a little bit easier to solve. So subtract 9 from both sides, and you can see here that actually is going to be equal to 1. Okay, so what that means is that f of 1 is equal to 9, which is another way of saying f inverse of 9 is equal to 1. Okay. And now that we've gotten this value for f inverse figured out, if we want to find the derivative of f inverse at 9, then using what we know from before, this is 1 over the derivative of, this is the derivative, not the inverse, the derivative of f inverse at 9, which is equal to 1 over f prime of 1. Okay, so oops, right off the screen there. So now we have to find f prime. Well, f prime of x, this is simple to do because this is a polynomial function. So that is 9x squared minus 1, and f prime of 1 then is equal to 9 minus 1, which is equal to 8. So that means the derivative of f inverse at 9 is equal to 1 over the derivative of f at 1. Sorry, I keep writing off the screen here, which is 1/8. And that is our final answer. So let's look at kind of the big picture of this and what this really means. Namely that there's a couple tricks here. One is that we're going to use this formula that we proved a little bit back a couple videos ago. And two is that to find the inverse, the output of the inverse function, you can just take the input, set it equal to the output of the original function, and solve for that. And that's a much more efficient way in order to find the value of the inverse at a specific point. Okay. And now I'm going to go on to the next example where we're dealing with something that's a little bit more challenging. So example 4 here, what we're dealing with is a table question, and the AP writers are very fond of these types because they test a conceptual understanding. You don't have a function that you can deal with. You don't have an equation or anything like that. You just have to think about what this means. Okay? So first here we know that G is equal to F inverse. Okay? So what we're asked to define here is G prime of 6, and that's another way of saying the derivative of the inverse of F at 6. So now we just apply what we learned before, that the derivative of the inverse function is equal to 1 over the derivative of the original function, so F prime, of G of 6. G of 6. In other words, if we are going to pass 6 into G, right, what would we get out of here? What would we get out of here? Okay. So it's straightforward to look at this on the table in order to determine it. If we were to pass in, another way to say this is, well, what would we pass into F in order to get 6, right? Because these two are going to be equal. Well, if you look at the table, if we pass in 2 as the input, then F of X is going to produce 6. So that means G of 6 is equal to 2. So this formula over here, 1 over F prime of 2, okay, is going to be our answer. F prime, I realize there's a typo in this. This should say F prime, not F inverse. That doesn't make any sense. Okay, so let me cross this out. This should say F prime of X right there. Okay. Well, F prime of 2 is 1/3. So this is 1 over 1/3, which is 3. And that is our final answer. Okay. So there you have it. A way to deal with table and conceptual questions on an AP exam. And you really should practice and think about this, because the questions are very well designed to test your conceptual understanding, and they're also very well designed to exploit anybody's lack of understanding. If you have a little bit of a misunderstanding about this, you're probably going to get this question wrong. Okay, but keep working at it. As always, ask for help if you need it. Thank you for watching, and have a wonderful day.